Amara had lived most of her life in Europe, circled by elegance, status, and the kind of social rules that quietly teach someone who is worthy and who is not. Recently moved to Beverly Hills, she decided to celebrate her new life with a gift to herself. When she stepped into the town's most luxurious jewelry store, her eyes widened in awe. The diamonds sparkled like stars trapped in glass. She felt at home among the shine. But the moment a black man in simple clothes walked through the door, her expression hardened. Acting on the same prejudice she had carried for years, she marched toward him and ordered him out, convinced he was poor and there only to cause trouble. The man Robert froze, stunned, embarrassed, too shocked to form a sentence. Before he could respond, the door opened again. David, Amara's wealthy fiancé, walked in, immediately sensing tension. His voice cut through the room, calm, confused, and firm. "Why are you throwing him out?" he asked, before turning to Robert with respect. "He's the owner of this jewelry store. I've known him for years." Amara's face drained of color. She stumbled for words but offered no apology before rushing out. David watched her leave, unease settling in his chest as a question he had never asked himself began to echo louder and louder. Do I really know the woman I'm about to marry? What happened next would shake every certainty he thought he had, because this moment was only the beginning. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's uncover how this story truly began. The morning sun washed over Beverly Hills in a soft, golden glow, warming the glass facade of luminous legacy. Inside, silence held a kind of cathedral-like reverence. The staff moved with practiced elegance, their steps soundless on the marble floor polished to a mirror sheen. The air carried the delicate perfume of white orchids resting in crystal vases. Robert's choice. He believed every detail mattered, even the fragrance people breathed when entering the place where love stories became diamonds. The front doors opened with a pleasant chime, and Amara swept in as though the store were an extension of her own ego. Her heels clicked sharply, puncturing the serene atmosphere. She moved with an entitled confidence, chin lifted, lips painted in a severe shade that made her expression even colder. She had lived in the U.S. for only a few months, but she acted as if Los Angeles had been waiting centuries for her arrival. "Show me the most expensive piece you have," she demanded, before even glancing at the displays. Her accent curled with practiced sophistication. Her tone dripped with disdain. The employees straightened. They were used to wealthy clients demanding ones too, but something about Amara always set them on edge. She treated them not like people, but like malfunctioning fixtures, barely acknowledging their existence unless she needed something. A second chime sounded. Robert stepped inside quietly, wearing a faded vintage t-shirt and jeans clothes that made him look like he had come from an early coffee run rather than the owner of the most exclusive jewelry store in the city. His leather satchel was old, the kind that survived years of memories, not trends. He greeted the staff with a warm, humble smile as he crossed the showroom, intending to head to the back office to check inventory. Before anyone could speak, Amara turned. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of him. Something in her expression tightened, as though she'd inhaled a foul scent. "Deliveries are in the back alley," she snapped, stepping toward him with a rigid spine and pointed finger. "Or, better yet, just leave. Someone looking like you doesn't belong in a place of luxury." She swept her hand dismissively. "You're scaring the clientele." The room froze. One of the clerks managed a weak "ma'am," but Amara silenced her with a glare sharp enough to carve glass. Robert blinked, trying to process the hostility hurled at him so suddenly. It wasn't the first time someone had looked at him and made an assumption, but it still hit like a quiet punch to the gut. His instinct was always the same: stay calm, breathe through the sting, avoid escalating. He didn't want a scene. He never wanted one. "I'm not," he began softly. But Amara raised a manicured hand inches from his face, as if his voice itself was an offense. "If you don't leave," she said, "I'll call security." He swallowed. The humiliation pressed against his chest, heavy and familiar. Even here, his story was still vulnerable to the snap judgments of someone who believed wealth and whiteness were synonyms for worth. The doors chimed again. David strode in, his face bright with excitement, until he took in the scene before him. Amara standing rigid and furious. Robert frozen mid-sentence, the staff stunned into breathlessness. "Robert!" David exclaimed with relief, crossing the floor in long strides. He wrapped his arms around him in a warm, unrestrained hug. "Man, I was just telling Amara how brilliant you are. I'm so glad you're here." Amara's expression flickered, confusion, disbelief, then horror. David turned to her, still smiling. "Amara, this is Robert Vance." He gestured proudly. "The owner of Luminous Legacy, and the man who designed your engagement ring." Amara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her face drained of color. The room held its breath, every pair of eyes on her. Robert did not gloat. He didn't smirk or savor the moment. He simply offered a polite nod, though his eyes carried a sadness that didn't belong on a man so gentle. David waited for Amara to say something, an apology, even a startled laugh. Instead, she inhaled stiffly and leaned toward her fiancé, her voice dropping into a cold whisper. "You didn't tell me your friend was one of them." That sentence, dripping with venomous prejudice, cracked something inside David. For the first time, he truly saw her, not the polished elegance he fell for in Paris, but the cruelty that lived underneath. Before he could speak, Amara turned sharply and stormed out of the store, heels striking the marble like shattered glass. The doors slammed behind her. Silence settled again, but now the orchid smelled a little less sweet, the light a little less warm. David stood still, staring at the exit long after she had gone, as though the echo of her words burned into the air. Robert touched his shoulder gently. "You okay?" David exhaled, shakily, embarrassed, angry, heartbroken. I don't know who she is anymore." But the truth was clearer than either man wanted to admit. And the fracture Amara carved with a single sentence was only the beginning. David followed Robert through the quiet hallway that led to the private office hidden behind the showroom. His steps were unsteady, the weight of humiliation and shock pressing against his ribs like something physical, something heavy. Robert opened the glass door with a soft push, letting David enter first. Inside, the office smelled faintly of roasted beans and sandalwood, warm, familiar scents that usually calmed visitors. But David felt no calm. His hands trembled, and he kept rubbing his fingers together as if trying to erase something invisible clinging to his skin. Robert moved with slow, deliberate motions. He pulled 2 small espresso cups from a shelf, set them on the counter, and turned on the machine. The low hum filled the room, a soothing sound, yet Robert's shoulders carried a stiffness unusual for him. David watched him closely, seeing something he had never seen in the man before. Not anger, not indignation, but a tiredness that lived deep in the bones. When Robert finally handed him a cup, David could barely speak. He held the porcelain between both palms, trying to steady himself. Robert sat across from him, exhaling as though releasing a burden that had been sitting in his chest far too long. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "It's not the first time, David." His eyes, usually bright and soft, were dimmed, subdued by a kind of sorrow David couldn't bear to look at for long. "But it hurts coming from the woman you love." The words settled heavily between them. David felt them like a knife sliding beneath his ribs. That's exactly it," David whispered. His throat tightened. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Robert, I didn't." He stopped, voice breaking. He pressed the heel of his palm against his forehead, ashamed at how easily his composure had shattered. Robert didn't interrupt. He simply waited, giving David the space to unravel. David inhaled shakily. "We met in Paris," he said, his voice soft as though confessing something fragile. 4 months ago. She was radiant, confident. She felt like this spark I didn't know I'd been missing. His lips twisted into a bitter smile. I thought it was charm. European charm, that's what I called it. Robert nodded once, slowly. But then I noticed small things, David continued, staring down at his untouched espresso. Little cruelties. The way she snapped at a server for bringing sparkling water instead of still. How she treated the house cleaners like machines. How she scoffed at people she thought weren't high enough for her attention. He swallowed hard. And today? What she said to you. His voice dissolved. Shame wrapped around him like a suffocating fog. Robert didn't let the silence stretch to cruelty. People show who they are when they think no one important is watching, he said gently. Though his words were calm, his eyes flickered with something raw. But that doesn't make it hurt less. David lifted his gaze, and the devastation in his eyes was unmistakable. Robert, he whispered, I think I'm marrying a monster. Robert's breath caught just slightly. Not out of surprise, but because the pain in David's voice reminded him how deeply betrayal could cut. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He looked as though he were unraveling thread by thread. I need to know who she really is, Robert. Not who she pretends to be at galas. Not the woman who smiles in photos and says all the right things. I need to know the truth, the real her. For a moment, Robert simply studied him. His expression softened, yet something firm began rising beneath his sadness, an undercurrent of resolve. He tapped his index finger lightly on the wooden desk, a slow, rhythmic movement that carried a shift in energy. Robert, the pacifist, the calm soul who rarely sought confrontation, seemed to transform before David's eyes. If you want to know the truth, Robert said quietly, we have to see how she reacts when the one thing she loves most is threatened. David blinked. The one thing she loves most. Robert's gaze did not waver. Your money. The words landed bluntly, with the sharpness of truth that had been lurking in the shadows. David paled. You think she doesn't love me? I think she loves what being with you gives her, Robert replied. But love? Real love? His voice softened, though the pain behind it was unmistakable. Real love doesn't look like what she did today. David covered his mouth with one trembling hand. The espresso had gone cold, untouched. His breath hitched as if he might cry again. Robert stood, walked to his printer, and retrieved a freshly printed document, its formatting chaotic, its margins uneven, its language intentionally frantic. A legal notice, the kind that screamed urgency and impending disaster. He returned to David and placed the document in his hands. David scanned it, eyes widening. Asset? Freeze? He whispered. Total liquidation? It's a facade, Robert said, but a plausible one. Tell her you lost it all, that everything is frozen, that you're not sure how much you'll have left. He paused, letting the weight of the suggestion settle. Let's see if she loves you, or the lifestyle. David clutched the document tightly. His breath quivered in his chest. Fear flickered in his eyes, but so did something else. A desperate, aching hope that maybe, somehow, she would choose him over comfort. Robert, he whispered, voice trembling. What if she leaves? Robert looked at him with a kind of gentle gravity. Then she was never yours to begin with. David exhaled shakily, nodding, though his eyes glistened. The truth hurt, but running from it hurt worse. With trembling fingers, David folded the document. Robert watched him, his expression steady, compassionate, but carrying the same quiet grief from earlier grief, not only for what happened to him, but for what David was about to discover. When David finally stood, bracing himself for the night ahead, Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. A small gesture, a grounding one. Whatever happens, Robert said softly, you won't face it alone. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. And as he left the office, clutching the false legal notice like a verdict waiting to be delivered, Robert remained behind, staring at the closed door with a heaviness in his gaze. He knew the truth long before David did, and now it was time for both men to face it. David's mansion, usually glowing with warm light and filled with quiet music, felt different that evening. The walls seemed to echo more than they used to, as if sensing the strain inside the house. The lamps were dim, shadows stretching long across the polished floors. David sat on the edge of the living room sofa, shoulders slumped, wearing a wrinkled shirt as if he had pulled it from the back of a drawer. His hair, usually styled with gentle precision, was slightly disheveled. Even his breath sounded uneven. He had practiced for hours in front of the mirror, trying to settle into the role of a man whose life had just fallen apart. But now that the moment had come, he didn't have to act. The sadness was real, even if the bankruptcy wasn't. Amara entered the room with the clacking rhythm of high heels, her perfume trailing behind her in a floral wave. She paused when she saw him, and his expression eyes down, lips tight as if holding back something heavy. For a brief instant, he hoped she might cross the room and sit beside him. Place a hand on his shoulder. Ask if he was all right. Something small. Something human. But Amara simply stood there, her arms crossed. "What happened?" she asked, not gently, not with concern, but as if bracing herself for inconvenience. David drew in a shaky breath. There was a collapse," he said quietly. "The investment fund I told you about, it unraveled overnight. It took everything with it." Amara blinked, processing. "Everything? You mean the accounts?" David nodded. "The credit cards?" Her voice sharpened. "Yes. The wedding budget?" Her tone climbed higher, breathier, trembling with a panic that had nothing to do with him. He swallowed, all frozen. "The bank is. They're seizing the assets. The house may—" He let his voice crack on purpose, lowering his gaze as though it hurt to say it. Amara's eyes widened, but not in compassion. Her features twisted into something almost feral. "David, this cannot be happening. Do you know what people will say if I cancel the venue? My mother already told all her friends. This wedding is expected. We can't just fall apart." David stared at her, the pain real now, cutting deeper than he imagined. "Amara, I just told you I might lose everything. I thought you'd want to know how you're what?" she snapped. "How you're feeling. David, this isn't about feelings. This is about reality. We built a life. We have standards. What are we supposed to do now? Shop at thrift stores?" He felt something inside him close, quietly, like a door clicking shut. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She cared about the lifestyle, not him. Before David could respond, the doorbell rang. He straightened, heart kicking painfully against his ribs. Amara huffed and muttered something under her breath before turning toward the foyer. David followed in slower steps, preparing for the next phase of the plan. When Amara opened the front door, Robert stood on the threshold, not as himself, not as the friend who had held David's shoulder just hours before, but as the asset liquidator. He wore a crisp, dark suit and carried a clipboard thick with papers. His demeanor was all business, colder than David had ever seen him. Even his posture was different, frigid, authoritative, detached. Amara blinked. "Who are you?" "Robert Samuels," he said in a clipped, professional tone. "I've been assigned to begin the preliminary asset assessment and liquidation." Amara's face twisted. "Liquidation? Now? Tonight?" Robert didn't flinch. "These matters are time-sensitive, ma'am. The bank authorized immediate evaluation." He stepped inside without waiting for permission. Amara shot a stunned glance at David, who looked away, pretending shame. Robert moved efficiently, tagging the marble statue by the entryway, the antique console table, the Persian rug. His pen clicked sharply each time he marked something for seizure. Amara followed him, sputtering, her resentment simmering into rage. "This is insane. You can't just barge in here and take things. "Do you know who we are?" she demanded. Robert looked at her coolly. "Ma'am, I'm simply doing my job." "Like a vulture," she hissed, picking at what hard-working white people built. David's stomach clenched. A small part of him wanted to step in, say something, defend Robert, but this was the test. This was the moment they needed her true self unfiltered. Robert remained stoic, expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "the artwork will be appraised. Please stand back." Amara shoved past him, pointing a sharp, accusing finger. "You have no right to touch that. That painting is worth more than your salary in a decade." Robert said nothing. He simply placed a small green sticker on the frame and scribbled on his clipboard. His silence only fueled her. David watched her unravel, her face twisting into something ugly. Something he wished he could pretend he had never seen. Every word she threw at Robert sliced through the fragile hope David had been holding on to. He felt himself shrinking inside, as if losing pieces of who he thought he was. Robert moved toward the bedroom hallway, tagging small sculptures and framed photographs. Amara stomped after him, muttering curses under her breath. When they reached the threshold of the master bedroom, Robert stepped inside and tagged the large painting hanging beside the walk-in closet. David remained a few steps behind, watching the scene unfold with quiet agony. Amara stormed into the adjoining bathroom, slamming the door hard enough to make the frame rattle. David shut his eyes, overwhelmed. Robert, about to tag another item, paused. He had heard something muffled words through the bathroom door. He raised a hand slightly to quiet David, then leaned subtly toward the sound. Amara wasn't crying. She wasn't collapsing in despair or anger. She was speaking, fast, urgent. In French, her voice low, sharp, laced with fury. "L'idiot a perdu l'argent. Prepare le volume. Je dois récupérer la poque du coffre, à la poque du coffre, avant qu'il ne fermente la maison." Robert's spine stiffened. The idiot lost the money. "Prepare the flight. I need to get the package out of the safe before they lock the house." Not a friend, not a confidant. Someone else. Someone expecting her. David watched Robert's expression shift barely, but unmistakably from neutrality to concern. Robert leaned back, meeting David's eyes with a silent message. "There is more to this story than you know." And somewhere inside the bathroom, behind a locked door, Amara was already planning her escape. And whatever she called the package wasn't meant for David. Robert felt the weight of what he had overheard pressing against his ribs like a slowly tightening band. He kept his expression carefully neutral as he signaled to David from across the foyer. It was subtle, just a brief lift of the hand near his clipboard, but David understood. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and turned back toward Amara with a stiff smile, engaging her in small, useless conversation about dinner plans she clearly no longer cared about. While David endured her clipped responses and icy glares, Robert moved toward the staircase with steps that were quiet but deliberate, as though the house itself might protest his intrusion. Every sound seemed amplified: the soft creak of the second stair, the faint hum of the chandelier bulbs, the distant cadence of Amara's sharp voice drifting upward like broken glass. He reached the master bedroom and closed the door just enough to mask his presence. The room smelled of perfume and fresh flowers, an intentionally curated atmosphere of elegance. But beneath it, he sensed something hollow, a facade. He crossed to the walk-in closet, thumb brushing the small brass key David had pressed into his palm earlier that afternoon. "Only if necessary," David had whispered. Now, it felt not only necessary, but urgent. He unlocked the closet door and slipped inside. Silence wrapped around him again, thick and expectant. The soft lights in the closet reflected off rows of tasteful dresses arranged with surgical precision. Shoes lined the floor in color-coded gradients. Handbags sat on glass shelves like artifacts. He almost missed it. the faint metallic glint behind a row of silk blouses. The wall's safe, and it was slightly ajar. Amara must have opened it in her panic, too frantic to disguise her intentions, too confident in David's distraction to imagine anyone else might come looking. Robert's heartbeat slowed, not sped up. It was an old habit from the years he'd spent learning to calm himself in the face of conflict. His breath moved evenly, steadying his hands as he reached out and eased the safe door open with a soft, metallic sigh. It wasn't jewelry that caught his eye first. It was the passports. 3 of them, stacked like forgotten playing cards, all bearing Amara's face, all with different names. Amara Dubois, Claire Van No, Elena Ross. He felt a cold ripple spread across his chest, an instinctive, visceral recognition that, whatever they had believed Amara to be, a cold socialite, a gold digger, a cruel woman, was only the smallest fraction of the truth. These weren't passports for travel. These were escape plans. Lives she had constructed and abandoned like costumes. He reached for them with careful fingers, lifting each one as though it might crumble. Her expressions were the same in every photo, poised, beautiful, controlled. But now, to Robert, her face looked predatory, calculated, empty. Next to the passports sat a bundle of documents, bank slips, contracts, a USB drive labeled simply "Our receipts from Paris, Lisbon, Prague," all under different identities. Robert felt the air leave him in a slow exhale. This wasn't a woman running from past mistakes. This was a woman planning future ones. He took out his phone, his hands steady, and began capturing photos. The click of the camera seemed impossibly loud, so he paused twice, listening for footsteps on the stairs. None came. Amara was still downstairs, likely circling David like a hawk, demanding explanations he didn't owe her. When Robert finished documenting everything, he placed the passports back exactly as he found them. The safe door closed with a soft click, final, decisive, cold. Before leaving, he paused once more. His reflection in the mirror looked older than he expected. Tired, yes, but something else too, disappointed. Not just in Amara, but in the cruelty she directed at a man who had loved her with an honesty she didn't deserve. He slipped out of the closet, returned to the hallway, and descended the stairs with silent, deliberate steps. David was in the living room, shoulders slightly hunched, hand pressed to his forehead. Amara stood across from him, her jaw tight, her posture rigid. She looked like someone preparing for mourning a loss. As Robert reached the bottom of the staircase, he saw her shove something sparkling into her purse, a tiara, delicate, diamond-studded, probably worth more than most people's yearly salary. He approached with that same calm expression, clipboard tucked under one arm. "That's bank property now, ma'am," he said softly. She spun around, her face twisted, an expression that was almost animalistic in its defensiveness. "Don't you talk to me," she snapped. "You think I don't see what you're doing? You people are always trying to steal from us." The words hit the air like a slap, sharp and humiliating. David's head jerked up, horror blooming across his face. Robert didn't flinch. Racism was nothing new to him, though it never failed to sting. What mattered more in this moment was David, who looked like he had just watched the woman he loved tear off her mask and show something rotten beneath. Robert bent slightly, wiping the small fleck of spit from his shoe where she had intentionally aimed. His movements were slow, controlled, filled with a kind of dignity that made Amara's rage look even smaller. When he straightened, he looked her directly in the eyes. Not unkindly, but with a gravity that made her blink. "We're not taking your future, Amara," he said in a voice low and steady. "Just your past." For the first time all evening, she fell silent. Robert turned without waiting for her reply, leaving her in a rare state of speechless confusion. David watched him go, his breath trembling, his hands gripping each other, as though fighting the urge to collapse completely. And as the front door closed behind Robert, the house felt strangely quieter, like something had shifted. like the truth was no longer hiding in the shadows, but walking freely among them, waiting to be reckoned with. A week passed with the kind of slow, tense quiet that fills a house when two people are pretending not to see the cracks forming beneath their feet. David barely slept. The dark circles beneath his eyes deepened each day, and his shoulders carried a weight he couldn't name aloud. Amara floated through the mansion like a ghost made of silk and perfume, her movements sharper than before, her voice clipped, impatient. She looked at David, not with concern but with calculation, as though evaluating whether he remained a worthwhile investment. It was on a gray morning, over a breakfast neither touched, that David cleared his throat. His voice came out rough, a fragile blend of desperation and hope. "There may be one last option," he said, staring into his untouched cup of tea. "A charity gala this Friday. Investors will be there. People with real power. If I can convince just one of them to back me, I might be able to rebuild what was lost." Amara lowered her spoon slowly. Her eyes narrowed, not in empathy, but in strategy. She looked at him with the care one might give to a damaged valuable only if it could still be displayed. "And this investor," she said softly, "would save everything?" David nodded. "If I can secure the loan, yes." Silence stretched thin between them. Amara sighed, long and theatrical. "Fine, I'll go. You'll need me looking my best if you expect anyone to take you seriously." Her voice held a faint contempt, one she didn't bother to hide anymore. "Just tell me when to be ready." David smiled faintly, but the expression didn't touch his eyes. He didn't tell her that the gala wasn't about saving his fortune. It was about saving himself and exposing her. When Friday night arrived, the city glittered under winter lights that shimmered across the pavement like scattered diamonds. The gala venue, a sprawling ballroom in a historic museum, glowed with chandeliers the size of small cars, each crystal reflecting movement, color, whispered secrets. Amara stepped through the entrance as though she were entering her coronation. Her dress clung to her like liquid gold, her hair an intricate cascade of glossy waves. Her walk had purpose, confidence, entitlement. People turned to look. She basked in it. David followed a step behind, appearing smaller than usual. His black suit was perfectly tailored, yet he seemed swallowed by it, as though the fabric carried too many memories. Robert arrived separately. His tuxedo fit so flawlessly it seemed crafted directly onto his frame. His presence drew attention, not for the wealth it represented, but for the quiet gravitas he carried. People nodded respectfully as he passed. Some whispered. Others stared. Robert Vance was the kind of man whose reputation preceded him in every room. Amara didn't glance at him. Not even once. Her eyes were fixed elsewhere on the older oil tycoon seated at one of the front tables. A man with silver hair, sun-weathered skin, and a tailored suit that shouted influence. She moved toward him with a smoothness that suggested she had done this many times before, this subtle positioning, this strategic charm. David watched, something inside him fracturing silently. Robert, from the balcony above, saw everything. He had positioned himself there intentionally, far enough to observe unnoticed, close enough to intervene. His hands rested on the railing, his expression unreadable. He took in the way Amara leaned forward while speaking to the tycoon, the light touch on the man's arm, the way her smile brightened only for the potential of a new benefactor. Then he noticed something else. Amara's hand drifted toward her engagement ring. Her fingers brushed it once, twice, and then, effortlessly, she slid it off. She dropped it into her clutch without hesitation. It was a gesture so small, so cleanly executed, that anyone not paying attention would have missed it. But Robert didn't miss anything. He inhaled slowly. This wasn't a woman hedging her bets. This was a woman abandoning ship. Down below, David tried to keep his composure as he spoke with acquaintances who asked insincere questions about his recent challenges. He kept glancing toward Amara, but she never once looked back at him. Robert descended the stairs and approached the table where Amara sat with the tycoon. He slipped seamlessly into character again. The help? The background figure she dismissed so thoughtlessly. It was a role he had come to understand, not because it diminished him, but because it revealed her. He stepped next to the table, holding a silver tray with glasses. "Excuse me," he said with quiet politeness, offering them champagne. The oil tycoon smiled warmly. "Ah, thank you, young man." But Amara's reaction was immediate and vicious. Without even glancing up, she whispered sharply, "Not now." When he didn't move away fast enough, she kicked him under the table, hard enough that Robert felt the contact shudder through his shin. "Get away from me!" she hissed under her breath, lips barely moving. The tycoon blinked, confused. His gaze shifted between them. "Is everything all right?" Amara gave a brittle laugh. "Just incompetent service tonight, that's all." Robert didn't respond. He simply nodded once and stepped back, his face blank, though a quiet sadness flickered in his eyes. Sadness not for himself, but for David, who stood across the room unaware of just how profoundly his fiancée had already discarded him. The lights suddenly dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The event organizer stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for a cause that touches us all. Before we continue, we are honored to introduce the man who funded this entire evening, a visionary whose generosity made tonight possible, Mr. Robert Vance." Gasps rippled through the tables as turned. The spotlight swept the room like a slow-moving sunbeam until it landed squarely on Robert. He stood tall, composed, his hands clasped lightly in front of him. Across the room, Amara froze. Her clutch slipped from her fingers and the glass she had been holding slid from her grasp, hitting the marble floor with a sharp, ringing shatter. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a breaking spell. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted in a soundless shock, because in that single moment, with the spotlight illuminating him, Robert looked nothing like the help she believed him to be. He looked like the kind of man she had always chased, the kind of man she had tried to manipulate, and the kind of man who had seen, documented, and understood everything she thought she had hidden. The pieces were shifting, and Amara felt it. She felt the floor begin to give way beneath her perfect shoes. The room watched her as she stared at Robert's, stunned, and suddenly, terrifyingly aware that the world she had crafted was about to collapse. The applause settled into a soft murmur as Robert stepped fully into the spotlight. The stage lights painted a gentle sheen across his dark tuxedo, catching the edges of his cufflinks, small, understated pieces that gleamed with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. His posture remained straight, but there was a weight in his eyes, something honest and vulnerable beneath the surface calm. He approached the microphone, paused, and let the room breathe with him. "Good evening," he began, his voice warm, resonant, carrying across the ballroom with a steady grace. "Tonight is about community, about what we build together, about the ways we lift each other up when life becomes difficult, confusing, even painful." His gaze moved across the audience, grounding each word, inviting them to feel rather than merely hear. "And it is about kindness," he added softly, "because kindness reveals character in ways success never can." He let that settle. It was a truth so simple it landed like a quiet blow. Robert's eyes drifted deliberately toward Amara. She stiffened at her table, her spine straightening as though she could will herself invisible. But he didn't look away. The connection held calm, unwavering. "Value," he said slowly, "is not defined by how loudly someone shines on the outside, but by how true they are on the inside." A hush swept the room. Robert's voice lowered, gaining emotional texture. "Some diamonds," he continued, "are flawless under pressure. Others?" A pause, just enough to draw every breath inward. "Some diamonds are flawed on the inside no matter how much you polish them." A ripple went through the audience, a soft, instinctive reaction to the metaphor that sounded too intentional to be coincidence. People glanced toward Amara without trying to hide it. Her jaw tightened. Robert stepped back slightly from the microphone, breathing quietly, allowing the meaning of his words to settle like dust over the room. Then he did something unexpected, something that made Amara's heart leap in sudden hope. "I would like to invite someone dear to me onto this stage," Robert said. "A man who has shown more courage in the last week than most do in a lifetime. David, join me." Gasps and applause filled the air. Amara surged from her chair so quickly she knocked it over. For the first time in days, her face bloomed with confidence. Relief washed over her like warm water, softening her features. She rushed forward, weaving between tables, grabbing the train of her gown so it wouldn't slow her frantic ascent to the stage. She wasn't running toward Robert. She was running toward salvation. David reached the stairs, looking nervous, emotional. Amara was already at his side, slipping her hand around his arm, clutching it with manic urgency. She widened her smile for the flashing cameras, tilting her head sweetly toward him, whispering through clenched teeth, "You fixed it. I knew you would. Let's smile." The crowd watched, sensing something brittle beneath her polished expression. David swallowed hard. Under the stage lights, his eyes glistened, not with triumph, but with a quiet devastation. He gently tried to pull his arm free, but Amara only tightened her grip, her nails pressing crescents into his skin. "David," she hissed softly, "this is our moment. Don't embarrass me." He exhaled, closed his eyes, and this time he removed her hand firmly, decisively. The microphones caught the faint sound of her sharp inhale. It pierced the silence like a small, breaking bone. The room stilled. Every breath, every whisper, every clink of glass disappeared. David stepped closer to the center of the stage, gripping the microphone with trembling hands. Amara followed, trying to recover the moment, trying to reach for him again until he turned to her, and the expression on his face stopped her in place. His voice came out raw. "Amara," he said, and the room leaned in. "I'm not broke." People blinked, startled. "I never was." A collective murmur shivered through the audience. David's voice cracked as he continued, exposing not just truth, but the emotional bruising he had carried alone for far too long. "But I am," he said slowly, painfully, emotionally bankrupt, "from loving you." The words hung in the air with the haunting heaviness of a confession that had been fighting to escape his chest. Amara's lips parted. Her eyes widened with shock, disbelief, then anger. What are you talking about?" "David, stop this. This isn't funny." She reached for him again, but he stepped back. Behind them, Robert gave a small, deliberate gesture to the tech booth. The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. At first, the crowd expected a montage of charity work, smiling children, or community initiatives. Instead, they watched the jewelry store camera angle appear, the exact moment Amara had humiliated Robert, berating him for daring to exist in a space she claimed as her own. The audio echoed through the ballroom with cruel clarity. "You're stealing. People like you always are." Gasps, disgusted whispers. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. Amara spun toward the screen. "Turn it off? This is illegal, David. Stop him. Stop them." But the footage continued. Then the second recording played. Her voice, sharp, cold, dripping with disdain, filled the room. The idiot lost the money. "Prepare the flight. I need to get the package out of the safe before they lock the house." People shifted away from her at their tables instinctively, as though proximity alone carried danger. Someone muttered, "My God." Another whispered, she was going to run. Amara's face twisted, panic overtaking her fury. She looked at David, begging now. "This is taken out of context. You know how I talk when I'm upset. David, tell them. David, stop this." But David just stared at her, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Not for her, but for the man he used to be. The one who had loved her without seeing the shards beneath her smile. Then, without warning, the panic changed shape. It curdled into rage, a white-hot primal fury. People would say later that they saw it happen, her expression shifting in an instant, the transformation startling and unfiltered. Amara's eyes locked onto Robert, the man who had pulled every rug from beneath her. Her scream ripped through the microphone and the room simultaneously. "You ruined everything! You envious, dirty," and then she lunged. Not at David. Not at the screen. At Robert. Her hands curled like claws, her face twisted into something feral, terrifying, a full mask torn away at last. The crowd gasped. Security stepped forward. David stood paralyzed. Robert didn't move. He didn't flinch. He looked at her with a kind of heartbreaking calm, as though he were watching the final crack appear in a stained glass window he had long known was fragile. And the moment froze there, her body suspended in motion, her scream unfinished, the room holding its collective breath. A cliffhanger carved in human emotion, betrayal, and truth finally rising to the surface. For a suspended second, the entire ballroom felt like a single held breath in, moving, trembling on the edge of breaking. Amara's lunge toward Robert cut violently through the air, but she never reached him. Security alert, precise intercepted her mid-motion, arms crossed over hers, lifting her back with practiced efficiency. Her scream twisted into something raw and hoarse as they pulled her away from Robert, her heels scraping furiously against the polished floor. "Let go of me! He attacked me! He attacked me!" She shrieked, her voice cracking not from innocence but from desperation. The crowd recoiled. Some flinched. Others muttered, sensing instinctively that something darker was unraveling in front of them. "Ma'am, calm down," one of the guards said quietly, trying not to escalate the already flaming tension. But calm was not something Amara understood. Not now, not ever. Her tears came suddenly, big, dramatic drops that smeared her makeup down her cheeks in theatrical black streaks. Her chest heaved in dramatic pulses, the kind meant to evoke pity, but instead revealed the hollow chamber inside her. "They're framing me," she sobbed, trying to twist free of the guard's grip. "Those videos, those recordings, they're deepfake AI. They planned this, both of them." She pointed wildly toward David and then Robert. "These men conspired to humiliate a defenseless woman." The word defenseless echoed with an ugly irony. A ripple moved across the room. Some raised eyebrows, some looked away, no longer fooled. More than a few exchanged glances that said everything. "We know what this is. We see it now." David stood frozen, shoulders trembling, eyes hollow. Robert simply watched her, not gloating, not furious, just witnessing the truth finally unclothed. Amara's sobs grew louder, wobblier, almost theatrical. "You don't understand," she whimpered, grabbing at a guard's sleeve. "They're lying. She pointed at Robert, has always hated me, because of my status, because I'm successful, because Her voice cut off. A figure stepped forward from the other side of the ballroom, slowly, deliberately. A woman with silver hair pinned in a graceful twist, wearing a gown of deep emerald satin that shimmered like memory under light. Her posture was elegant but firm. Her eyes, though softened by age, were sharp with an intelligence that did not fade with time. The room parted for her as if instinctively recognizing that she was carrying something important, something final. She approached Amara until only inches separated them. The guard still held Amara's arms, but the older woman seemed unafraid. She tilted her head, studying Amara's face with a growing certainty. "I know you," she said. The words struck the air like a hammer wrapped in velvet. Amara stiffened. "What?" she stuttered, jolting backward as far as the guard would allow. "No, you don't. I've never—" "Yes." The woman's voice was soft, but it carried enough weight to silence everyone nearby. "You were calling yourself Elena in Rome." The room fell dead quiet. The woman didn't blink, didn't falter. 3 years ago, she continued. You stole my brother's pension, his life savings. A shocked murmur pulsed through the crowd. Amara's face contorted, first into disbelief, then panic. That's insane. I don't even know where Rome is on a... Enough. The woman's tone dropped, quiet and devastating. You didn't just steal his money. Her voice wavered, grief seeping through the cracks. You left him with nothing. He died 5 months later. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. A shiver moved through the ballroom as whispers began spreading like wildfire, devouring every corner of her remaining dignity. Grifter? Con artist? She's done this before? She's dangerous. Look at her. A man near the front muttered bitterly, playing the victim. Typical. Another voice added, she's the one from that video, the racist one. The word racist hissed across the hall like steam searing skin, a label that clung to her, undeniable, inescapable. Amara's breaths grew jagged, uncontrolled. She twisted violently, breaking a nail against the guard's grip. Let go! She screamed. Get off me! All of you! Get away! But no one stepped closer. No one offered sympathy. No one offered rescue. Her social standing, the thing she worshipped, the thing she curated like a shrine, was incinerating before her eyes. Each whisper a spark, each truth a flame licking at the fragile structure she had built her life around. Amara didn't just lose the room. She lost her world. She tore herself free with a burst of frantic strength and stumbled toward the exit, her stilettos slipping on the marble. Move! She yelled at 2 guests near the door. Move! I said. They didn't. They stepped back, but not to make space, to avoid her. It was rejection distilled into a single motion. Then she saw him. Robert. Standing in front of the double doors. Calm. Still. A single figure blocking her path, not with malice, not with anger, but with immovable purpose. She froze. Move! She snarled. No. Robert's voice was steady. He didn't raise it. He didn't posture. You can't leave yet, Amara. A tremor moved visibly through her frame. You don't get to decide that, she snapped, but even her arrogance was sputtering. Robert looked at her not with triumph, but with clarity. The bill hasn't been paid. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. The meaning slipped under her skin like ice water, cold and intrusive. He wasn't speaking about money, or furniture, or jewels. He was speaking about truth, consequences, the long ledger of who she had hurt and who she believed she never would answer to. Amara tried to take a step backward, but the room had closed behind her. She was caged by the very people she once tried to impress. Her breath came fast, shallow. Then the lights outside flashed blue and red, spilling across the tall ballroom windows like a warning smeared across glass. Sirens chirped once, then cut off abruptly. This wasn't a noise complaint, or a security call. The ballroom doors at the far end opened with deliberate force. Uniformed officers stepped inside, not hurried, not panicked, but with the quiet authority of people who knew exactly who they were coming for. At their front walked a detective in a slate gray suit, holding a small, transparent evidence bag and a set of photographs. The room parted as they approached Robert first with respect, not confusion. The detective nodded at him. "We received your call," she said. She lifted the photographs, multiple passports, different names, same face. Amara's face. The detective turned slowly toward Amara, her expression unreadable but firm. Amara Dubois, Claire Van No, Elena Ross. She listed the names with a quiet, precise gravity. "We need to talk." The entire room held still. Amara stared at the photographs as if they were daggers suspended midair, aimed directly at her. Her voice cracked into a whisper drowned in terror. No! But the detective was already stepping toward her. The cliffhanger froze there, a woman collapsing under the weight of her own lies. A room watching justice walk toward her, and a reckoning finally, irrevocably at the door. Amara's scream rips through the ballroom like a jagged tear in silk. The music stops mid-note. Crystal glasses tremble on tables draped in gold. Conversations die instantly. Every head turns toward the stage where two officers tighten cold metal cuffs around her wrists, pulling her arms behind her back with a firmness that leaves no room for negotiation, no space for denial. She thrashes anyway. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieks, her voice cracking at the edges, splintering under panic. Mascara streaks down her cheeks in uneven rivers. Her gown, silver, sequined, triumphant just minutes ago, clings to her like a shroud now, suffocating her with its weight. "David?" she screams, reaching toward him as though he might save her, as though her voice still had power over him. "David, help me! Tell them the truth! Tell them you know I would never." But David doesn't move. He stands with his back half turned, shoulders tense, hands hanging at his sides. He isn't cold. He isn't angry. He looks tired. Like every lie she ever told suddenly collapsed onto him at once, a weight he can finally set down. Amara's voice falters when she sees it, his detachment, his relief. A tiny sound escapes her, fragile and disbelieving. "David?" He closes his eyes for a moment, then turns fully away. That breaks her more than the handcuffs. A hush washes over the crowd, something slow and thick, heavy with shock and morbid fascination. Even the chandelier lights seem to dim, as though the room itself is holding its breath for what comes next. The detective, a tall woman with sharp eyes softened by a lifetime of difficult truths, steps toward Robert at the side of the stage. Her presence is calm, certain, the kind that makes chaos fall into line. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she says quietly, her voice meant for him but reaching several curious ears nearby. "We've been tracking the Black Widow of Paris for 5 years." The crowd reacts to the name like a gust of wind passing through wheat heads turning, whispers rustling, curiosity bending toward the revelation. "We lost her trail," the detective continues, "until you sent us the serial number on the watch she wore to your store." Robert doesn't smile. He doesn't gloat. He simply nods with a composure that feels earned, like the calm after a long internal war. A stunned silence follows. Someone at the back of the room gasps. Another whispers, "The Black Widow? Here?" Amara hears it all. Her face twists, disbelief curdling into rage. "That is not me. I'm not." She tries to pull from the officers, but their grip only tightens. The detective raises a hand, and the room falls quiet again. "A rare Patek Philippe, platinum, custom complications," she says, her gaze shifting to the crowd so they understand the magnitude. "Reported stolen from a French diplomat 2 years ago. Only one like it in existence." Slowly, as though his movements carry the weight of the entire past week, Robert exhales. His eyes drift, not to Amara, but to the memory of her standing in his store in Chapter 1. Her lips curled in contempt, her voice dripping disdain as she called him incompetent, lesser, unworthy. Back then, most people would have wilted under that kind of venom. But Robert had simply looked at her wrist. He had seen the watch, the angle of the lugs, the custom engraving half hidden by the light, the faint mark on the crown, identical to the detail in the police report he'd seen months earlier in a collector's bulletin. He hadn't been paralyzed by fear. He had been assessing, calculating, verifying. He hadn't required her apology. What he needed was time. And the Bankruptcy Act, David feigning financial collapse, Amara exposing her true nature, had given him precisely that. David had executed his role perfectly, hiding his devastation behind shaky hands and unruly hair. Robert had orchestrated the pacing, the distractions, the space for her to trip on her own schemes. all of it designed to keep her from fleeing, to keep her close enough for Interpol to verify the stolen serial number and link her to the passport photos she had so carelessly left behind. Robert wasn't just defending himself from cruelty. He was catching a predator, a professional one, a globe-trotting, heart-harvesting, identity-shifting thief who preyed on trust the way others preyed on fear. As the officers begin escorting her toward the exit, Amara's body jolts with each step, her voice rising again but losing force. "Stop! Let me speak! Let me speak!" But no one is listening anymore. Not because they lack sympathy, but because for the first time they see her clearly. Not as a refined woman, not as a socialite with icy confidence and flawless presentation, but as a chameleon whose skin had finally peeled back. Halfway to the door, she twists her head over her shoulder. Her eyes search the ballroom not for help. She knows help isn't coming, but for understanding. For some recognition of the woman she pretended to be. There is none. The crowd looks at her with an expression that is almost mournful. Almost. And then her gaze lands on Robert. It freezes there. Her breath sharpens, caught between fury and the terror of being unmasked. For the first time, her voice quivers. "Who are you?" She spits, but beneath the venom is something more, fragile, a tremor of dread, at the thought that she may have underestimated him from the start. A long heartbeat passes. Robert adjusts his cufflinks with meticulous calm, the way a surgeon might prepare before a final stitch, the way a pianist might ready his hands before the last note. When he speaks, it is barely above a whisper, but it carries through the room like a verdict, clean and inarguable. Just the shopkeeper. The words strike her harder than any accusation could, because they remind her that her downfall wasn't delivered by a rival of equal deception or a criminal mastermind. It came from a man she dismissed as insignificant. A man who saw what others didn't. A man who refused to bow when belittled. Amara's knees wobble. Not from fear of the law, but from the realization that she misread the world so catastrophically that the person she underestimated most is the one who ended her entire empire of lies. The officers guide her through the doors, her shouts fading down the corridor. The ballroom stays silent for several seconds more. Then, slowly, the atmosphere shifts, like a collective exhale after a long-held breath. People return to themselves, blinking, adjusting their posture, murmuring disbelief at what they just witnessed. David stands alone for a moment, the stage lights soft against his face. He looks toward Robert, the gratitude quiet but profound. Robert gives him a small nod. It's over. Or at least, the worst of it is. But neither man looks triumphant, just relieved. Because justice, when done right, never tastes like victory. It tastes like peace. The city moves differently in the weeks following Amara's arrest. The echo of the gala still pulses through Beverly Hills like a bruise that refuses to fade, darkening and blossoming with each retelling. Headlines flash across every screen, every glossy page, every gossip column that once praised her elegance and ambition. Socialite exposed as international con artist and bigot. The Black Widow of Paris captured at charity gala. Local shopkeeper. Helps Interpol crack 5-year case. Her name becomes a synonym for deception. And strangely, almost poetically, Robert's small jewelry store, Luminous Legacy, transforms into a quiet beacon of integrity, a symbol the city didn't know it needed. Customers come not just to buy, but to feel grounded, to remind themselves that decency is not extinct, that quiet men still stand for something in a world built on illusions. Robert doesn't change. Not really. He still cleans the glass cases himself, still straightens the velvet ring trays, still offers tea to customers who look like they've had a long day. But there is a softness to him now, less guarded, less weighed down by the silent battles he's fought alone, a gentleness reclaimed. Still, there is one person he wonders about more than he lets on. It's nearly a month later when David finally appears. The bell over the door jingles softly, but the sound feels heavier somehow, tired, like a sigh. David steps inside wearing a navy button-down and the same shoes he wore the day he first pretended to be broke. But now there is something quieter in his posture, something looser. He looks older, not by years, but by experience, the way grief reshapes the bones beneath a man's skin. Robert looks up from polishing a watch case. His face stays calm, but there is a flicker of concern, relief, recognition, something human that breaks through his composure. "David," he says gently. "It's good to see you." David attempts a smile. It falters, then settles into something more honest. Small, fragile, but real. "I should have come sooner." "There's no clock on healing," Robert replies. David laughs softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that's becoming pretty clear." He wanders the store slowly, hands in his pockets, studying pieces he's seen 100 times before, as if they're suddenly new. Maybe they are. Trauma recalibrates the eyes. It sharpens some things, blurs others. When he finally stops in front of the counter, he exhales a breath he's been holding for weeks. "I wanted to thank you," he says, voice steady but threaded with emotion. "For everything. You saved my life, Robert, not just financially. You saved me from continuing down a road where I was losing myself." Robert's jaw softens, the weight of the words landing with quiet significance. "You saved yourself," he answers. "I only nudged the truth into the light." David swallows, blinking rapidly as though refusing to let tears win. "Still, you didn't have to help me. You didn't have to." "Care." Robert folds the cleaning cloth, hands steady. "I didn't help you because I pitied you. I helped you because you were drowning. And sometimes all a person needs is someone willing to throw a rope." A silence settles between them, not empty full, heavy in the way only shared experience can be. After a moment, David lowers his gaze. "Can I ask something personal?" "You can," Robert replies. "Why did she hate you so much?" David's voice cracks a little, bruised by the memory. "I keep going over it in my head, trying to understand. Because even if she was a con artist, even if she lied about everything, some of the things she said to you were monstrous. And it haunts me that I let her say them." Robert's eyes drop to the counter, fingers brushing the edge absently. His expression is thoughtful, not wounded, reflective. Like a man who has carried this question longer than he has carried the scars it left. "She didn't hate me because of who I am," he begins softly. "People like her never truly hate others for the reasons they claim." David listens, still as stone. "She hated me because my existence challenged her fake superiority," Robert continues. "Racism is often just a mask for deep insecurity, a shield for people who fear they are small. And when someone they consider beneath them stands tall, it threatens the whole fragile house of cards they've built." David releases a long, shuddering breath. "I never saw her like that. I never saw anything." He meets Robert's eyes, grief and shame swirling there. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize for not recognizing poison," Robert says. "It's designed to look like perfume." David lets out a choked laugh, wiping his eyes. "Yeah, feels accurate." He reaches into his pocket, then, slow, reluctant, as if retrieving something both heavy and hollow. When he places the small velvet box on the counter, he doesn't look at it, only at Robert. "I want you to take it," he says quietly. Robert opens the box. The engagement ring stares back, beautiful, cold, still carrying echoes of promises that were never real. "Melt it down," David murmurs. "Make something beautiful for someone who deserves it. Not her. Never her." Robert closes the box gently, respectfully, as though sealing away a ghost. "Are you sure?" David nods. "That ring was meant for a lie. I want it to become something honest. Emotion tightens Robert's throat. I can do that. There is a long pause, a shared stillness. David steps back, wiping a final tear from the corner of his eye. I'm rebuilding, he says softly, slowly. One day at a time. And you will, Robert replies. You already started. David gives him a genuine, warm smiler, small spark of renewal lighting in his chest. Then he leaves, the bell chiming softly behind him, leaving Robert alone with the quiet hum of the store. For several minutes, Robert doesn't move. He simply holds the ring box in his hands, feeling the weight of endings and beginnings resting inside. Finally, he walks to his workbench, sits, and opens the box once more. He lifts the ring delicately, placing it under the bright lamp. He picks up his loupe and leans in, letting the magnification pull him into the small universe embedded in the diamond. And that's when he sees it. A microscopic scratch, so faint it would disappear under most lights. A flaw that he knows he didn't put there. A flaw that wasn't part of the original design. It's nothing to anyone else. But to Robert, it speaks. A small, imperfect rebellion. A diamond rejecting the hand that wore it. A quiet truth resurfacing. A soft warmth spreads through his chest, satisfaction, not of triumph, but of poetic justice settling gently into place. He lowers the loupe and smiles. Morning light rests gently on the glass windows of luminous legacy, soft and golden, as though the sun itself understands the peace that has returned to the small jewelry shop. The streets outside still carry the hum of Beverly Hills cars gliding by, distant conversations floating through the air, but inside, the shop exists like its own world, steady and warm. Robert stands behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose as he carefully adjusts the tiny mechanism on an old gold locket. It is not an expensive piece. In fact, the chain is faded, and the hinge squeaks every time he opens it. But the elderly woman sitting across from him, her hands trembling slightly in her lap, looks at the locket as though it is the last surviving fragment of a life she misses. He treats the piece with quiet reverence. There, he murmurs, snapping the hinge gently into place. Try it now. The woman leans forward, eyes shining with the cautious hope of someone who has had many things slip through her grasp. She opens and closes the locket again, amazed at how smoothly it moves. You fixed it, she whispers, her voice cracking as though she didn't expect such kindness. My husband gave me this when I was 17. I wore it through every pregnancy, every move, every fight, and every forgiveness. Robert smiles softly. Then it deserved to be cared for properly. Tears pool in her eyes and she reaches for his hand, gripping it with fragile gratitude. You treated it like it mattered. It matters because you matter, he replies. She nods, pressing the locket to her heart before standing up. When she reaches the door, she turns back, smiling with such tenderness it softens the entire room. Robert watches her leave, the gentle chime of the door echoing in her wake. For a moment, he stands still, letting the quiet settle inside him like a warm breeze. He feels no triumph, no desire for recognition, just a deep, grounding satisfaction, a quiet joy that comes from living in alignment with who he is. He wipes his hands on a cloth and looks around the shop. The velvet displays are perfectly arranged. The soft overhead lights reflect tiny sparks across the cases, making the diamonds glitter like captured stars. Everything is calm again. Yet nothing is the same. Robert exhales slowly, allowing himself to reflect, not on the chaos of the gala, not on the headlines or the shockwaves that spread through the city, but on the subtler truth beneath it all. He did not defeat Amara with anger. He did not respond to cruelty with cruelty. He did not need to shout or break or push back with the same venom that was aimed at him. He simply told the truth. He simply stood firm in who he was. Humiliation had tried to stain him, but dignity had washed it clean. Not with arrogance, not with vengeance, but with steady, unwavering self-respect. He thinks about David, how the man walked into the shop broken and walked out lighter. He thinks about the people who now come not for sparkle, but for reassurance, for the comfort of knowing that integrity still exists somewhere in the world. He thinks about the path that led him here, and he realizes something quietly profound. Dignity is not loud. It is not boastful. It is not dramatic. It is a soft, persistent flame that continues to glow no matter how hard someone tries to smother it. And when the time comes for truth to be seen, that flame lights up the room brighter than any diamond. The thought brings a gentle smile to his lips. Just as he begins reorganizing a display of earrings, the shop door chimes again. Robert turns instinctively, prepared to greet whoever has walked in with the same calm warmth he offers everyone. But then he pauses. In the doorway stands a young black couple, mid-20s, maybe younger. The man wears clean but worn sneakers, his shirt tucked in too carefully, trying a little too hard to appear confident. The woman clutches her bag nervously, her eyes darting across the room as though expecting someone to tell her she doesn't belong. They whisper something to each other. The hesitation is thick, heavy, familiar, the kind of fear born not from insecurity, but from experience, from being dismissed, judged, questioned. Robert sees it instantly. He remembers the sting of eyes that measure worth incorrectly. He remembers the silent doors that speak louder than words. He doesn't stay behind the counter. He doesn't wait for them to come forward. Instead, he rounds the glass display and walks toward them with open arms, not literally, but with the unmistakable posture of welcome shoulders relaxed, smile warm, presence gentle, and reassuring. "Good morning," he says softly, as though greeting old friends rather than strangers. "Welcome to Luminous Legacy." The couple exchange surprised glances, not expecting warmth, not expecting respect. The young woman's shoulders drop slightly, tension dissolving. The man shifts his weight, his face softening with relief. "We weren't sure if we could afford anything here," the man admits quietly, almost embarrassed to voice it. Robert shakes his head with kindness that feels like sunlight. "This place isn't about what's in your wallet," he says. "It's about what's in your story." The woman covers her mouth with her hand, tears pooling in her eyes at the unexpected compassion. "You belong here," Robert whispers, voice steady, gentle, true. As they step fully into the shop, the camera pulls back slowly, the couple's relieved smiles glowing in the soft light, the diamonds sparkling like promises behind them, and Robert standing nearby, a quiet guardian of dignity, kindness, and truth. The frame holds for a moment, breathing in the peace of the new beginning. Then it fades to black. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful narratives of justice, healing, and emotional transformation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.